Hello and welcome, my friends around the world, to the second set of quarterfinals here from Mythic Championship 1 in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm Tim Willoughby, joined by Simon Gertson, and we are honored, nay privileged, to be able to bring you some high-octane magic here as we head down to our feature match area for our second set of quarterfinals. The big match that I think that all of us, as soon as we saw the way that the bracket panned out, we're getting excited about is coming right now. We're going to get a chance to see Marcio Carvalho up against Luis Scott-Vargas. We have Luis on his 10th Pro Tour Top 8. Big numbers for him as he hits double digits. A rare club, that is indeed. And for Marcio, this is another chance for him to lock up something that he's been chasing for a while. He's had 3 different finals finishes going into these absolutely top-level events. And now that we get to the very first Mythic Championship, he is hungry to try and get there and has potentially the biggest roadblock imaginable in Luis Scott-Vargas.
This is the headliner, no questions asked.
It is going to be absolutely huge, but we must not forget, of course, that we do have another match in our quarterfinals as well. We're going to get a chance to see Michael Bonde up against Yoshihiko Okawa. Ikawa in his second Pro Tour Top 8, and that one, I think that in terms of the pace of things, might be running a little bit slow because that's where we get a chance to see our full-on control decks. And it's kind of a control against combo thing that we're going to see. Michael Bonde, he's the one with the Nexus of Fates, potentially going to be taking a lot of turns in a row. We've got a lot of different things to work with in this second set of matches.
Yeah, I talked to Ikawa in the backstage area, and he's not looking forward to his match against Bonde. It's really, really difficult for Esper Control to beat the Nexus decks.
Yeah, we'll, of course, get a chance to see all of that and indeed all of our magic because we've heard the players already. Let's head down to the feature match area for this, the second set of quarterfinals from Mythic Championship 1. Hello and welcome to our feature match area here at Mythic Championship 1. Tim Willoughby alongside Simon Gertson, and we get to see 2 of the greats of the game here just getting ready mentally in order to have, well, this could be a knockdown, drag-out fight. We've got Marcio Carvalho there. You see him. This is his 6th Top 8 in Mythic Championship history. Desperately chasing that trophy, has not yet been able to pick one up. On the other side of things, though, we've got a Hall of Famer in his 10th Top 8. And Luis Scott-Vargas, he has got a trophy behind him, but he would dearly love to pick up another one. The matchup, well, we have Azorius Aggro in the hands of the Portuguese player. For Luis Scott-Vargas, it's almost as if Ravnica Allegiance never came along because his Izzet Phoenix list, it would have been legal at the last Mythic Championship. Cavallo here kicking things off with a Glacial Fortress tapped, and it's a Steam Vents tapped for Luis Scott-Vargas. Early doors, not a whole lot going on, and when we look at what's going on in Scott-Vargas' hand, quite a lot of lands that he's working with.
Mm-hmm. But he can't be unhappy about this hand. It has a lot of potential to develop. Also, if I'm in the Izzet Phoenix seed, not seeing a 1-drop from Azorius Aggro is always good news.
Of course, if there's not 1-drops, there must be something spicy going on, and we see it there as we have a look at Cavallo's hand. Both Benelish Marshall and History Benalia, the key powerful 3-drops coming along, and they will threaten a lot of damage as and when they're able to get going. But yeah, the Legion's Landing coming along on turn 3, that's not exactly what you would have been hoping for if you're in Cavallo's seat.
Yeah. Goblin Electromancer is one of the key cards in Izzet Phoenix, and of course you can see the Azorius Aggro deck can't just easily deal with the Goblin. So Louise is going to take full advantage of this turn, even potentially getting back Arclight Phoenix as early as turn 3 here.
Yeah, Arclight Phoenix coming down early and often to get attacks in, important. But the way that this red-blue Izzet Phoenix deck scales is the thing that really excites me. The fact that it can threaten a huge amount of damage almost unpredictably as a second Arclight Phoenix comes into the graveyard. Both come into play here, and this means that Luis Scott-Vargas, he may not even need to think about the late turns. He gets to just get the damage in good and early here. 6 damage in the air. Nothing that Marcio Carvalho can do about that. He drops to 14.
Yeah, slow start by Marcio and an insane draw by Louise, who gets double Arclight Phoenix with the help of those chart the courses.
And Scott-Vargas here with some nice follow-up potentially, even if it works out that these Phoenixes get dealt with. A couple of shocks and a Beacon Bolt means that there's every chance to think that he might be able to get back those Phoenixes very straightforwardly indeed.
Absolutely, and if Marcio doesn't gain any life, Luis just needs to use one of these shocks to have Marcio on a 2-turn clock with the Phoenixes in the air.
Tide Taker and a Knight coming in here to do a little bit of damage, obviously aided by that Banalish Marshal that we saw moments ago being played by Cavallo. But the life totals, they're tumbling on both sides. It's going to be Louise that has the more difficult to block creatures here. So you're absolutely right, Simon. Life gain could be a very big feature if Marcio is going to be able to stay in this game.
You see LSV digging for red mana here. He is not really restricted by the amount of mana he's available with Goblin Electromancer, but currently only one red source in play.
And a couple of shocks in hand here. History of Benalia threatening to go off soon enough. There might be a temptation to try and deal with some of these creatures on the board before that. But I mean, I guess if you're Louise, you're actually not that far from simply just killing your opponent with Burn here.
This is the thing. If you, for example, shock the Vampire token, then Marcio doesn't gain any life, and you have that turn 2 clock that I mentioned. However, there is quite an attack force on the other side of the table.
Yeah, at some point this Goblin Electromancer may have to resort to getting in the way of a sizable attacker from Marcio Carvalho here. Beacon Bolt, a pretty potent one here. There's already a fair amount of spells in that graveyard, so it should be able to deal with just about anything, and it will cost just the 2 mana thanks to Goblin Electromancer. Looks like that is what we're going to see here from Scott-Vargas. Goes for the Benalish Marshal. The Marshal representing a lot of extra damage on this board with such a wide board coming from the Portuguese member of the MPL.
It's 3 power on its own. It's a Knight, so it would have gotten pumped by the History of Benalia final trigger. And of course 4 other creatures currently benefiting or have been benefiting from its static ability.
And now that Benalish Marshal is gone, that means that Shock able to take down one of those Knights. So the History of Benalia, as it pops here, actually not doing too much with its third act. The ending to the book maybe not quite as exciting as the start and the middle.
And you can see that Louise decided, with the amount of pressure on Marcio's side of the board, he did not have the luxury of just going for a quick win here. Needs to take things a bit more slowly. And of course, most importantly, has to get back those Phoenixes if he blocks with them this turn.
And in some respects, even though the Benalish Marshal coming down does represent more damage this exact turn for Marcio, the fact that Luis still has Beacon Bolt in his graveyard means that he's got a clear path to get rid of it, and he's not seen anything else from the member of the Magic Pro League on the left of our screen here. So it could be a lot worse, and he does get to just block here with these Arc-like Phoenixes, leaving a comparatively empty board and him being the one with cards in hand.
There was, of course, a 5/4 Knight token, so that's the reason why it wasn't blocked this turn.
Tithe Taker there with Afterlife, meaning a Spirit comes along to replace the 2/2 from Ravnica Allegiance.
If you look at LSV's hand, Tormenting Voice is going to do a lot of work here, and there is that backup plan of just casting Beacon Bolt from the graveyard so that you can guarantee 3 spells, even if those 2 draws, those 2 additional draws, don't cough up any.
Still having to be a little bit careful on red mana here, but there's the Beacon Bolt. That much we kind of knew was going to happen. It just had to deal with this Benalish Marshal in play that threatened a lot of damage. The fact that there's the 3rd spell, though, this is pretty exciting because it both limits the amount of threats on Marcio's side of things and means that Luis, all of a sudden, he's got that giant board back again. These Arc-like Phoenixes just doing work here, and when there's even a Goblin Electromancer attacking, this is Luis Scott-Vargas saying that he does not want to have to worry about this game going on too much longer. Attacks Cavallo down to 6, and the advantage very much in favor of the Hall of Famer on the right of our screen here.
Yeah, the Phoenix is coming back first for free, essentially, to start off the game, dealing some damage, then trading off, now back again with Beacon Bolt. An absolutely crucial removal spell means that Marcio cannot come back from that.
Haven't seen any Crackling Drakes this game, but you know what? The Arc-like Phoenix has proven to be the perfect Game 1 threat. Luis Scott-Vargas picks up Game 1 here at our 2nd set of quarterfinals at Mythic Championship 1 in Cleveland, Ohio. These players will, of course, not be going to the sideboard just yet. The way that things work in these quarterfinals is best of 5, the first 2 games getting played pre-sideboarded. So these guys are just going to be shuffling up getting ready for their game 2. And we will, of course, be getting on some more Magic very shortly indeed. Our second quarterfinal in this set is going on the back table, but first, just a few messages. Hello and welcome back to this, the second set of quarterfinals here at Mythic Championship 1 in Cleveland, Ohio. Tim Willoughby and Simon Gertzen bringing you all of the action from this, our second match in the feature match area right now. We get a chance to see Michael Bonde, probably the happiest Magic player in all the world right now, up against Yoshihiko Okawa. And part of the reason that Bonde's so happy is not just his general positive demeanor, but he's also got a matchup that, at least before sideboarding, looks really quite favorable.
Absolutely, Tim. The Esper control deck is, of course, built to prey on creature decks in the pre-sideboarded games, and here it is just really difficult to deal with those wilderness reclamations, to deal with Nexus of Fate being cast over and over again. And of course, once Search for Azcanta flips, transforms, you have no card in your main deck or even your sideboard to deal with it.
Yeah, this deck kind of an evolution of some of the Turbo Fog lists that we saw that were 3-color for a long while with the likes of Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. They've kind of got themselves a little bit more straightforward now that we come to Ravnica Allegiance. The addition of Wilderness Reclamation, just gigantic in terms of letting them be 2 colors and get to the mana that they need. We see here a Precognitive Perception being played at instant speed by Michael Bonde. He's tapping his instances of Wilderness Reclamation just so that you can get a good sense of which ones have been used and which haven't. He's even got a counter there to tell us how many extra turns that he has. Very, very straightforward for us to figure out what's going on here. And what's going on, essentially, is that he's found an occasion where Ikawa is fully tapped out. He's got access to just the earth and everything on it in terms of mana, and then we start thinking about the likes of all of the card drawing he has going on in order to continually find his copies of Nexus of Fate, and at some point play a big Hydroid Krasis that potentially could win the game before Yoshihiko Okawa even gets the opportunity to untap.
Yeah, this is another 5 cards, and you can already spot at least one Nexus of Fate in Bonde's hand. He is going to cast that again on his end step and then dig for more of them.
It's interesting. It's something that there might have been other iterations of this deck where I sort of said, you know what, we'd have to settle in for a little bit to see how long it's going to take for the Nexus player to actually win. This new iteration, it really can win quite quickly once it's in that winning position. And right now, Bonde, he does need to continually find copies of Nexus of Fate. He doesn't yet have a transformed Search for Azcanta to make it almost deterministic, but it's going to be 2 attacks with the Hydroid Crisis to close this down, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if he's able to do that very quickly indeed.
And one of them he already has stacked up, so it's really only a matter of finding one more Nexus. And even if he doesn't find it this turn, it's not like Ikawa can punish him from this position on.
Yeah, Ikawa's in a funny old spot where he does have some creature removal, and ultimately, given the way that the Nexus deck wins, that creature removal is not completely blank, but it's almost completely blank, just because this is kind of the way that Michael wants to play it out. He can potentially engineer a turn where his opponent's tapped out. He can get to a point where he might have counter magic for the key creature removal, at which point, yes, he can win the game very straightforwardly, and that's essentially what we saw there in this first game one. Big plays from Michael Bonde, picking up that first game, which ultimately he sort of always knew that he kind of had to do. These guys finished 4th and 5th in the Swiss, meaning that it was actually Ikawa that got to go on the play there, but I'm not even sure how big an advantage that is for his deck, which is a pretty straightforward Esper control list.
It is, but looking at the deck list, he only has 1 negate, he only has 3 Chemister's Insights, he only has 3 absorbs. So all of these slots are going to removal spells, even a main deck, the Eldest Reborn. Those cards are not helpful when you're playing against Wilderness Reclamation.
We are off to the races in our other quarterfinal match, though. This time around, we do see a turn 1 play from Marcio Carvalho there, able to get down just, for now at least, a straightforward 2-1 in Sky Marcher Aspirant, but it's not too difficult for this deck to get up to the City's Blessing, give it flying, and be able to do a lot of work. And the follow-up of 2 1-drops in the form of Legion's Landing, means that those permanents just flying onto the board for Cavallo.
Yeah, the second Legion's Landing being a bit weaker than the first one, of course. Cavallo probably not holding another good 1-drop that he wants to deploy, but 1/1 lifelinkers are certainly nothing to complain about in this matchup.
Now, one thing that Louise might reasonably complain about here is the way that his colors have been drawn in this second game. We saw him there playing a Charter Course, discarding an Arclight Phoenix. That much we're not too worried about, but look at his hand. He only has a couple of blue cards left in that hand. Now, admittedly, Radical Idea is a card-drawing spell which might help him find red mana, but if he doesn't find red mana fast, we may see ourselves going to a Game 3 very quickly indeed. And
even if he does, those cheap 1-drops are difficult to deal with, especially with an Ajani coming down. Now, if Luis is forced to pick up those creatures one by one, with the little red mana that he has available, he's going to be in big trouble.
Yeah, Ajani, Adversary of Tyrants there. I mean, I guess by extension that means that LSV is the Tyrant. He's certainly on the wrong side of Ajani right now, as these creatures are growing ever larger with the +1 ability. If they get taken away by some strange magic coming from Luis, then the -2 ability can simply get them back into play. This is a very difficult spot for Scott-Vargas.
You see Blood Crypt. This is the one card that makes this deck not legal in pre-RNA standard. That's just used to cast the other side of Discovery Dispersal.
Yeah, Dispersal, not the key elements that you're looking for from double Discovery Dispersal, but it doesn't hurt to at least have the option.
So Louise can drop a shock land here, have a shock available, see what Marcio does with Ajani, and try to stabilize on a super low life total. On the other hand, Marcio is down to a single card. Louise might just hope that he can get there. Oh, he decides to hold back. Probably that has to do with the spell count that he's planning for next turn.
Yeah, it makes sense to at least try and make the most of those copies of Arclight Phoenix in the graveyard. At some point, we're probably going to see a great flavor win playing a shock land into casting shock, but for now, Luis Scott-Vargas just going to have to look back and see exactly what Marcio Carvalho can do in terms of damage. You can see there the Portuguese member of the Magic Pro League carefully figuring out exactly how much damage he can do here, and presumably also trying to figure out what it is that Luis might be able to achieve on his next turn.
Yeah, but I have bad news, because if I read Luis's hand correctly, then he's actually hoping to top deck a 1-mana spell. He held back the shock, but he has by no means a guaranteed 3-spell turn here.
So Venerated Loxodon getting convoked out here. This the potentially free Verdurous Gearhulk coming from these white decks right now, pumping up the team a little bit, increasing the width of this board, also meaning that City's Blessing has now been achieved, so that Sky March aspirant, all his aspirations come true, it can now fly. And for Luis, it's looking very likely that going into these sideboarded games, they will have been split one game apiece.
Yeah. I want to mention here how Marcio has been maximizing the lifelink on his creatures, but also threatens to turn the vampires into 4/4s, which means they can even attack into Arclight Phoenixes on defense.
Yeah, Marcio using every avenue of attack here. How important is the lifelink, do you think, in this matchup, Simon?
It's not as important as against Mono Red or anything like that, but one of the lines that the Arclight Phoenix deck has available to it is this kind of racy game where you we really don't expect to lose, but suddenly there's a 2-turn clock that you were just not expecting with Arclight Phoenix and Crackling Drake. So it's definitely helpful to have that life buffer.
Snubhorn Sentry big enough that it can attack quite happily. Lava Coil here being played, and where's it going there? Dealing with the Venerated Lockstone, that does mean that maximum lifelink achieved by Marcio. Maximum number of Arclight Phoenixes, at least for present, for Luis Scott-Vargas is 2. They both stay back on defense. Unusual to have a creature that comes back from the graveyard repeatedly that has the ability to block.
Yep. But I mean, you do have to work for it. 3 spells in a turn is not something that you can just easily master up. And Marcio, of course, going for exactly what I just described. 3 4 toughness creatures makes it impossible for Luis to block with benefits here.
So Luis essentially just getting a bit of extra camera time here. It seems very unlikely that he's going to be able to find a way of surviving still one more turn. Tidetaker coming down for Cavallo, and is there any draw that can get Luis out of this? We will find out in just one moment. He picks up his cards. I mean, when you've got the likes of Tormenting Voice, you get to dig pretty deep, and it seems likely that if he really needs to, he will be able to get back Arclight Phoenix. But even 2 copies of Arclight Phoenix not enough. He might need to find a way of getting a 3rd one into the graveyard, maybe even a 4th, if he's even able to stabilize for this turn.
The problem here being that all 4 of these creatures are threatening lethal. So even if you get 4 Arclight Phoenixes somehow, you would still have to block every single creature, and let's not forget about Ajani sitting there threatening all of his abilities.
There has been a Arclight Phoenix picked up. With the Goblin Electromancer, that means Tormenting Voice gets to get the 3rd Arclight Phoenix into the graveyard. Has Luis managed to find a way of stabilizing for just one more turn here? The shock not looking terrifyingly great here. I mean, I guess that it gets to turn a Tidetaker into a 1/1 flyer. Lava Coil, though, that is interesting. We get to kill off one of those life-linking vampires. 3 copies of Arclight Phoenix in play. Luis Scott-Vargas somehow still in this game.
Yeah, with the power of Goblin Electromancer, the mana reduction really being huge here. And you can see the respect for Johnny's ultimate. You have to make sure that you're not just succumbing to 1/1 life-linking cats.
I mean, Marcio Carvalho here with a crazy amount of life advantage. On board, he has a bunch of threats that are going to be a big problem for Luis. And Luis essentially back to the wall. From now on, every attack is a lethal attack against him. But he is still in it. Cards in hand while Carvalho is pretty much living off the top of his deck in terms of additional things to add. But, I mean, even Adanto, the first fort, is kind of a problem for Luis here. Sources of just more creatures. And Marcio does not need to do very much to close out this game.
No, but suddenly Marcio at least has to think about what to do. Cannot just keep pushing for an advantage with the Ajani and with those 4 toughness creatures. This block is of course forced. Goblin Electromancer is going to jump in front of the Tidetaker because that's a creature he can take down.
Ral Izzet Viceroy in hand for Luis Scott-Vargas. If he ever hits a point of nominal stabilization, he might be able to use Ral to start to eke out more long-term advantage. But in some respects, each and every turn is going to be a similar puzzle for Luis, which is, can I get my Arclight Phoenixes back? Can I end in a position where I can consider myself kind of stable?
Mm. And you can see what kind of a controlling approach Luis takes to this game. For him, the Arclight Phoenixes are really ways of grinding out the Azorius aggro deck. Of course, they also threaten the life total. They also threaten the Planeswalkers. But in this particular matchup, it's really this gameplay pattern of let's block with my Phoenix, let's shoot down your creatures, let's get back the Phoenix over and over again. Especially the jumpstart cards are absolutely critical there.
We can see Adanto getting used by Marcio on his own turn so that he's able to use Ajani to put counters on the creatures that are most important to grow, those being the ones that were, well, at least until mere moments ago, just 1/1s. Luis Scott-Vargas, can he make Lightning Strike twice here, find another way out of the situation he finds himself in for this upcoming turn?
Yeah, Marcio needs to maximize the number of 2-power creatures that he has to attack with next turn, and the alternative line that he was looking at was to minus Ajani to get back another creature from the graveyard.
Okay, so kicking things off with a jump start there to draw a card. Ral Izzet Viceroy is simply too expensive for what Luis has going on right now. Gradually getting more lands in play, plays a Beacon Bolt from hand, absolutely tons of spells in the graveyard, so that not a worry in the slightest. It can kill whatever it wants, and it wants to deal with a 4/4 lifelinker. Sooner or later, Luis, if he's going to win this game, does need to actually do some damage, and with Marcio on 38, he can't afford to just let the member of the MPL gain still more life. And so 3 Arclight Phoenix in play. This time round, Luis not attacking him with a Phoenix to do more damage to Ajani. This means that he has the potential for a double block on Snubhorn Sentry, actually taking down the Dino.
Yep. He's also playing around Conclave Tribunal for the first time this game, something that he couldn't afford in the previous turns. He had to hope that Marcio just doesn't have anything in his hand.
Now, the Beacon Bolt that got played there, that was from hand for Luis Scott-Vargas, so we do have the potential for him to use it once again, presumably to deal with the Snubhorn Sentry on the other side of the battlefield, gradually whittle down what it is that Marcio is working with it. This is just an incredible game that we find ourselves with, Simon.
Absolutely incredible. I wasn't expecting anything less, to be honest. I think we are looking at 2 of the finest players to ever play the game. And, I mean, it's actually kind of crazy that Luis is still in this.
Yeah, I mean, each of these players has a long and storied history with Magic, but even if you just say, let's look at performances in the last couple of years, these have been 2 of the dominant players in the game.
The last couple of events, even.
Very much so. Skymarch Aspirant and an Adanto Vanguard coming along here. That Vanguard, one of the more indestructible Vanguards you'll ever find. Just so much life to play with for Marcio here that he can afford to be paying 4 life to give it indestructible again and again and again without even really feeling the pain for quite a while here. Crackling Drake coming along, drawing a card for Luis Scott-Vargas. The Crackling Drake representing quite a bit of damage here. We'll try and get a bit of a count on exactly how many spells in this graveyard.
I would say 11 in the graveyard plus 1 in exile. We'll get the exact numbers soon.
It's kind of crazy that this is one of the ways that even when you see a Marcio Carvalho with 38 life, there's no reason to think that that he's completely safe.
Yeah, looks like the total is 11.
Yeah, we got our handy little visual aids here, the judges and staff on the floor, making sure that everything as easy as possible for all of you at home to understand each and every play that we see here. Marcio Carvalho here. It's crazy that he's in a position where he's winning on life 38-2, gradually trying to get overlap on creatures, but this game is still very much not over.
Absolutely, and he even has that Adanto active for quite a while, but the way his draws are shaping up, he can't make a token and deploy something on the battlefield. He always has to decide what to do with that.
Up to 5 lands now, and with Tidetaker coming out of the graveyard, it means that this Ajani is suddenly a tempting target for any shocks that might come off the top of the deck, an easy Planeswalker to remove. And generally speaking, rule of thumb, guys, if you do have a way of removing a Planeswalker, often worth considering. Another Crackling Drake coming along now, and now we see Luis starting to hit a point where he can potentially be looking at dealing lethal damage going forward.
In a single swing, yes, if there are no blockers to think about. But right now, his problem is that Marcio is going wide, and each Adanto activation is producing 1/1s, but those are potential 2/2 attackers with the help of a Johnny or even Banalish Marshall. So if Marcio ever catches Louise off guard with just a single blocker effectively making the difference, then Marcio can easily steal this game.
So Beacon Bolt from the graveyard there jump-started to kill off that Snubhorn Sentry, meaning that, at least for now, Luis still just barely stable. But a Benelish Marshall off the top here from Marcio Carvalho pumps the whole team. I mean, in some respects, how much better is that than simply using Adanto the first fort?
He doesn't want to cast Benelish Marshall. He has it in hand. What he wants is he wants to have one more creature than Luis Scott-Vargas on the battlefield when he goes for it. So here you can see 5 blockers on Luis's side, 5 attackers on Marcio's side, and Marcio is doing the math just like we are, and might be considering, for example, an attack with Adanto Vanguard, because that might kill one of the creatures after you pump it. But all of these decisions now are always under consideration of what will happen to me when I pass the turn. Is there any danger of me taking 38? Because right now the count is 22 plus 9. That's already 31.
I mean, I guess that another consideration right now, for a long while, Luis has been ahead on cards in hand. He's just got the 1 card left in hand at this point. Marcio knows it, and that means that an extra sort of metric to consider in terms of attacking here is, if I attack and kill off some Arclight Phoenixes, how likely is it that they get to come back, and how bad for me is it if that happens?
Exactly. And what you maybe don't want is to kill off 3 Phoenixes, because then you're gambling your future, right? If they come back, you're really in trouble. But if you get rid of maybe one of them, it's already a small victory that might mean you have the lethal attack force for next turn. And if Luis spends 3 spells to get it back, it's also a win for you.
So playing Banalish Marshall here does mean that the likes of Adanto Vanguard, if it attacks, is big enough to deal with a Crackling Drake on the other side of things. And Marcio very carefully considering exactly how many creatures he wants to attack in with here.
This is now combat math. I know the saying math is for blockers, but in this particular case, it's really for attackers as well, because you have to go through all the different combinations of blocks that Luis can make. You have to be extremely careful about that Sky March Aspirant, because it is your only flying blocker. If Tithe-Taker dies, you have another one, but you can't. Well, you can be sure it dies if it attacks, because otherwise you win the game. But you have to consider all these options and maybe think about a shock from Luis Scott-Vargas just losing you the game if you're not careful.
So Ajani here putting more counters on Marcio's creatures. I mean, I guess the one attacker that is almost free is the Adanto Vanguard.
I like the attackers that have 4 power here, so that Marcio doesn't get free blocks with Crackling Drake in. If you attack with multiple creatures, but a few of them have only 3 power, then it really doesn't bother Luis that much. He gets free blocks in the process. This way, the way Marcio attacked, he actually traded a creature. He got exactly that 1 Phoenix I was talking about. So now Luis effectively forced to spend 3 spells to get it back, and he even got a 1/1 flyer out of the deal, which is another lethal threat.
So Goblin Electromancer played out here by Luis Scott-Vargas, but nothing further from the American Hall of Famer here.
So now the count is 6 attackers to 5 blockers. Luis has a single card in hand, is effectively saying, this card can keep me alive. Do you dare attack here? And with Marcio not facing lethal on the crackback, that's, I think, the key to his decision making. He can actually go for it.
Yeah, and the fact that Marcio there drew a 1-mana threat in Sky March Aspirant means that now he can be deploying multiple threats in a turn, the Aspirant plus the activation of Adanto, the first fort, and that means that this go-wide plan so much easier before you even start thinking about what Ajani can put together. It may have been a long time coming, but it seems to me like for Marcio now, he should be feeling fairly safe on the win.
Yeah, and that actually means because of that potential of growing his army even further, he might not go for the win this turn, just to be that extra layer of save.
Yeah, this match, it must be said, the pressure that each of these players feeling, even though they've been in this situation so many times before in the top 8 of Mythic Championship level events, is still very, very high indeed. Marcio, desperate to pick up a win in a Mythic Championship, finally picking up his first game win here against Luis Scott-Vargas, and you can see the smile on his face there, but that was not as easy as it first seemed like it should be.
No, somehow these last 2 points, it's much more difficult when you're playing Azorius aggro and not mono red, you know?
Yeah, and we see here our players on the back table. They were sweating it out, thinking, maybe it looked like it should be pretty quick here. We're going to get a chance to see a game from Yoshihiko, Ikawa, and Michael Bonde from the very beginning here. And let's talk a little bit about the face of how this is going to go. Michael Bonde looking to get down a Wilderness Reclamation and at some point utilize all the extra mana that it generates to start casting Nexus of Fate and just getting huge amounts of value. But in the early stage of this game, both these players with Search for Azcanta, they're all going to be filtering their draws.
The similarities basically stop there because all the other cards are very, very different in both of these decks. Ikawa here, with a small victory, he gets to mortify Search for Azcanta. And while you might think that a Simic Nexus deck is primarily looking for Wilderness Reclamation, the problem with Search for Azcanta is it's one of the key cards for the deck to actually go infinite with Nexus of Fate, but also once that flips, you just don't have any more answers. So Wilderness Reclamations are a problem for the future for Ikawa, but he has more Mortifies, Negates, Absorbs to deal with those.
Yeah, the early stage of this game for Bonde very much set up, and for Ikawa, he's in some respects forced to play a different sort of tempo game than he might want.
Yeah, and look at how bad Karn is in this matchup. Basically, just drawing dead cards off of the deck. It's not that's not Karn's fault. It's really the problem with this game 1 matchup.
Yeah, the matchup where creature removal, while technically it can deal with Hydroid Krasis, in practical terms, that's not really the big fight that we're looking at here. I mean, while we think of Ikawa's deck as being a control deck, the amount of actual factual counter magic that it has going on for it is 3 copies of Absorb, 1 copy of Negate in the main deck. And then he's got Thought Erasure in terms of interaction, but he's not as good at stopping everything that this combo deck, I'm going to call it, from Bonde is really able to achieve.
Yeah, and then you have Mortify and Fortifaries to actually deal with permanents, enchantments on the battlefield. And I love this decision by Ikawa to just run everything out there. He's tapped out from turn 2 to turn 5 because he knows this matchup is lopsided in games 1 and 2 pre-sideboard. And if he wants to win, it's exactly with this kind of line where he says, if you have it, you have it, but I'm just going to go for it.
Growth Spiral coming at end of turn here for Michael Bonde. That means that he gets to accelerate lands into play, draw cards. I mean, it's one of those cards that as soon as we saw it printed, we weren't just in love with the artwork. Seb McKinnon doing a fantastic job on Growth Spiral, but also in love with all of that text. So much to like there. Kawa here with 2 real Planeswalkers in play and 1 almost virtual Planeswalker in his Search for Azcanta, generating lots of advantage in a whole host of ways. And it wouldn't surprise me at some point to see Karn start to make creature tokens just so he can at least put some amount of pressure on what Michael Bonde has going on here. Bonde there using Blink of an Eye to take Teferi out of the game, at least for now. And Bonde's deck also does have some counter magic available to it, so there's the potential that he can Sinister Sabotage a Teferi on the way back down.
That's the card Bonde is representing here. He actually has it in hand, and Bonde knows that Ikawa doesn't have mana to go for Teferi plus Negate or Teferi plus Thought Erasure this turn. The upcoming turn where Ikawa hits his 7th land drop would be a completely different story. The single Negate in Ikawa's list, by the way, has been exiled with a silver counter on it, so Ikawa might snatch that up, as you see right there.
Yeah, and you can bet that Michael Bonde will be taking very careful note of the fact that there is a Negate incoming. For now, Thought Erasure means that Yoshihiko Okawa is going to get just as much information as we have on what is going on in Michael Bonde's hand, even gets to take away one of those cards.
Yeah, it's interesting how there's been that much interaction in the early stages of the game. Usually, we would actually see Chemisters insights being cast on both sides for the beginning of the turns, and often for the Simic Nexus deck, it's not even advantageous to run out the enchantment threats against Esper Control, but rather just play a long waiting game and kind of suffocate Esper Control under all the dead cards that they're drawing and the mana limitation that they're under.
Yeah, Bonde here, not too worried about playing a breeding pool untapped. This is not really a matchup characterized by low totals in any meaningful way until the moment the game's over.
No, and also the construct tokens you mentioned. Oh, actually, to interrupt myself here, we see a huge play, potentially a huge play, because the Esper Control player, the only time they can tap out or they dare to tap out is at the end of the Simic Nexus player's turn. But then Bonde, who has had 7 mana available, responds with a Nexus of Fate. So if you're wondering why that happens, is you want to take that extra turn just to play against a tapped out Esper Control opponent for a single turn.
How satisfying is it to just have a token in the middle of your battlefield indicating that you have an extra turn lined up?
Yeah. And now, in a dream scenario, you actually take all the turns from here on out. With no Search for Escanda on the battlefield, and I believe no Wilderness Reclamation in Bonde's hand, that is very unlikely. But this is one of the ways you can win, even against a hand full of counter magic and even enchantment removal. You just wait until the Esper Control player is forced to tap out.
Now, the funny thing here is it would be easy to imagine, like, wow, this should take ages. He's going to have to spend, even if we imagine the dream scenario of you draw a Nexus of Fate every turn, you're not advancing anything. If there was the likes of one more land, Chemist's Insight, draw a land and a Wilderness Reclamation, you potentially can set yourself up to, through Wilderness Reclamation, have the mana to be able to keep taking extra turns, even without needing to get too much extra going on.
Yeah, and now Bonde is done casting Nexus of Fate. Of course, a top deck Nexus of Fate was not what he was looking for. That just effectively gives him a redraw.
But he has managed to find more counter magic in these extra draws that he's got going on here. So passes things back to a control player where he's been able to set up for future card drawing, future counter magic, and when you're the one drawing cards and countering spells against the nominal control deck, that's not a bad position to be in.
Yeah, but Ikawa must be quite happy about it being his turn again. Sure, there are some dead cards in his hand, but he is also stocking up on discard spells, on counter magic. He has a Mortify if something should sneak through there. And of course, the Teferi is also ready to come back down. Teferi, of course, great synergy with Negate, because that is something that you will have mana for.
So Thought Erasure here gets to take the counter magic, the Sinister Sabotage, out of Michael Bonde's hand, revealing the only things left, a Memorial to Genius and a Search for Azcanta. And Ikawa, his hand's stocked. He's in good shape in terms of dealing with what Michael Bonde has going on for a little while here. If he wants to, he can play Thought Erasure to get rid of that Search for Azcanta. If he wants to, he can get down Teferi, and this is exactly what he's going for. And he still has meaningful interaction ready, because with the +1 ability of Teferi, gets to untap 2 lands, and both we and Michael Bonde know that he has a negate.
And Bonde, of course, wanted to keep open mana for Sinister Sabotage and Chemist's Insight, but there is even the chance that he didn't want to expose a second Search for Azcanta to Mortify. So one thing you can try to do, it's not easy, but it's doable, is you go into some extra turns with Nexus of Fate without threatening to go infinite, but you sneak in a Search for Azcanta in one of these extra turns, then flip it immediately while your opponent cannot interact with it.
So here we see kind of a speculative Nexus of Fate here. Very powerful test spell, Nexus of Fate, potentially representing more mana, representing more opportunities.
I don't think you have to counter this, because in the end, Bonde is not generating much with that extra turn. If you look at the alternatives, the only scary thing is something that he would deploy this turn in addition to the Nexus, because then he untaps and he has one random card again. But with Ikawa being so far ahead, having Search for Azcanta, Karn, and Teferi and additional counter magic. He really just wants to get that turn back and not risk anything.
And Search for Azcanta has now transformed. We've got Azcanta the Sunken Ruin on the table for Ikawa. Azcanta the Sunken Ruin, obviously super duper powerful. Maybe a little bit scary, this whole situation of activate it, your opponent tries to take an extra turn in response. So it's not as free a powerful spell, powerful effect as you might find in some other matchups. But if Okawa was looking to draw up how he wins a game before sideboarding, this has to be pretty close to it.
Yeah, but also we are entering a stage where the Esper player just doesn't have to tap out completely anymore to win the game, to take over the game. There's a win condition already on the battlefield in Karn. Teferi will take a little bit more time to ultimate, but that is also around the corner.
Now, Blink of an Eye, one of the interactive spells that is available to Michael Bonde here, and it looks like that's the one that's being taken away by Thord Erasure. So this is Yoshihiko Okawa, rather than trying to stop the plan of Michael Bonde, which, to be honest, the plan of Michael Bonde right now really does rely on the top of his deck. Instead, this is Okawa setting himself up to be able to win the game a little sooner.
Yeah, you don't want to be forced to deal with the Blink of an Eye. You don't want to counter it. You don't want to give your opponent an instant speed interaction spell.
Look at all these cards in hand for Ikawa. I mean, the Kaiserrath, the Cry of the Canarium, we can kind of leave those ones to one side, but he could play another Search for Azcanta simply so that he's able to do more scrying. He can gradually take apart his opponent's hand, and indeed, he's just got backup answers to what's going on in both Absorb and Mortify. Fantastic position for the Japanese two-time Mythic Championship top 8er.
And you can see there, Ikawa not even considering a double activation of Azcanta, because that's not how you win the game. You have to make sure not to lose to the few threats that the Simic Nexus deck is going to be presenting here.
So Wilderness Reclamation coming down, gets hit by a Mortify, but look at what the top deck was for Michael Bonde. He's got counter magic, but so has Yoshihiko Okawa. Both these players devoting resources to be able to stop that little fight dead in its tracks. But now Michael Bonde, no cards in hand. He does not have any more copies of Chemist's Insight in the graveyard, so completely living off the top of his deck here. Meanwhile, Yoshihiko Okawa, well, the top of his deck will be helping him out plenty, but that's in part due to the fact that he could be drawing 3 cards a turn, 4 cards a turn if he needs. Kawa here has to be excited about being able to pick up any victories before sideboarding. This match looked very, very tough for him. Interested to see how it changes after sideboarding. It feels to me like it has to be a little bit better for Esper than it is right now.
It is, Tim, but at the same time, the strategic issues with this matchup still remain, even if you have if you have fewer dead cards showing up in your hand.
So it picks up another Mortify there from an activation of Azcanta the Sunken Ruin. Mortify, a reprint, but a very, very important one in terms of the shape of how Standard plays out. This is a format where there are a whole bunch of enchantments that you might want to deal with, but equally, you're never going to have it be, or you're much less likely to have it be a dead card because it also can deal with creatures. Teferi's interaction with Azcanta the Sunken Ruin, of course, meaning that there's absolutely tons of ways that Ikawa can dig through his deck for more action. He's got a couple of copies of Absorb in hand there. That another double-colored reprints that we see from Ravnica Allegiance, being able to make it so that you can counter spells and buffer that life total. Very important in some matchups.
Yeah, and you do need those extra backups, because even though Bonde is hellbent, doesn't have any cards in hand, this Memorial to Genius in his lands means that he is going to go for one more wave of threats after sacrificing that and maybe building up a hand that has potential Wilderness Reclamations, the third Search for Azcanta, Sinister Sabotage, or just as we've seen those end-of-turn Nexus of Fate or upkeep Nexus of Fate attempts.
Both of these Planeswalkers up to 8 loyalty now, and you can see Bonde looking a little concerned about the situation that he finds himself in here. 8 is exactly the amount of loyalty that Teferi needs to be able to generate an emblem. And once that emblem's on the battlefield, that is when Ikawa can really close the door on anything that Michael Bonde has going on. Every card drawing effect then becomes a way of removing one of the lands in play. I mean, not too likely to be much apart from lands in play right now. But yeah, this is a very tough spot for the Danish player on the right of our screen here.
Okay. I'll check them out.
Okay, Memorial to Genius has been cracked. Draw for the turn, finds a Nexus of Fate. The big test spell meets a big absorb. Ikawa, he's back up to 20 life. There's been a little bit of damage here and there from lands, but nothing really to write home about. And even if you wrote home right now, that letter wouldn't need to have any text because of absorb, and that's enough for Michael Bonde to pick up his cards. Yoshihiko Okawa picking up a game, and that means that 1-1 as these players go to their sideboards. We will, of course, get a chance to get a feel for exactly how the sideboarding goes for them soon enough. In the meantime, though, two players who have already had their chance to look at the extra 15 and figure out post-sideboard configurations are, on the left of our screen, Marcio Carvalho, one of the more decorated players in the MPL, up against a 10-time Mythic Championship top 8er and Hall of Famer in Luis Scott-Vargas. Snubhorn Sentry early doors will not represent too much damage just yet from Cavallo, and an early Goblin Electromancer, if unanswered, means that there can be some very high-octane plays coming from Luis Scott-Vargas. Let's have a little look at some of the things that can be going on after sideboarding for these players. There is the potential, once you look at the sideboard of Marcio Carvalho, that in principle he could have some counter magic going on here.
And he actually got a minor but relevant victory by being able to spell pierce that Discovery Dispersal. Spell pierce, of course, a card that doesn't quite fit into your white aggro strategy, but if you know that these cards that dig deeper for the Izzet Phoenix deck, that put potential Phoenixes into the graveyard, are the key to the matchup, then Spell Pierce is looking a lot more interesting.
And I must say that, to me, looking historically at all of the white aggro decks across the history of the game, the ones that have been the most exciting are the ones that have good disruption. And with the Azorius splash, with the blue splash of this particular white deck, it does get a lot scarier. Benelish Marshall coming down, meaning that Snubhorn Sentry actually is able to attack in here. And Luis Scott-Vargas now facing down a little bit more of a clock from Cavallo.
Yeah, but still, Cavallo with a slow hand, and that is exactly the time that the Izzet Phoenix deck needs to get up to speed, to really crank up the velocity here with next turn potentially, up to 10 mana of spells being cast. Those Arclight Phoenixes might show up at some point, or just a flurry of removal spells. So actually the big creatures in Marcio's deck are at their weakest, because this is what Lava Coils and Shocks are going to take out.
Venerated Loxodon coming down here for Marcio, who takes a turn off from attacking in the face of a 4/4 Crackling Drake. That Crackling Drake could get a lot larger here with a Goblin Electromancer powering up whatever it is that's going on from Louise. He's got a Tormenting Voice, he's got a Charter Course, he's got a Lava Coil. All of those, he's going to end up with a mana advantage on casting. And he also has a couple of removal spells here. If he can use one of those card-drawing spells to find himself an Arc-like Phoenix, then we could have a very explosive set of attacks indeed here, Simon. Lava Coil coming along first to deal with Benelash Marshall.
Only 5 power on the aggro side right now.
I mean, who's the aggro side? I mean, it feels to me like Luis Scott-Vargas is getting to play both as the beatdown and the control here.
The notional aggro side.
A 5/4 Crackling Drake coming across.
That's going to power up a Charter Course.
So this is just a straightforward divination for 1. The red decks, they've got a new way of doing this, but the red-blue decks, Charter Course has been doing it for them for a while. Now, I guess that the Charter Course post-combat does mean that it signals to Cavallo that at least right now there's no Arclight Phoenix to think about.
Yep.
Potential follow-up plays here coming from Luis Scott-Vargas. Plenty of mana for him to work with. The old stronghold copies of Shock that Luis was able to track down for this deck. Looking to... He's got some cards with some pedigree in there, some vintage in there.
Opts to discard Shock in the face of the creatures that Marcio has deployed. Luis knows that there are no 1 or 2 toughness, I'm sorry, 1 or 2 casting cost creatures in Marcio's hand, because he could have deployed those in his last turn before casting Venerated Loxodon.
Yeah, Luis reading all the signals in terms of what it might be that's coming from Marcio here. A kind of an extra game that's being played between these two in terms of the information war. Cavallo with another Venerated Loxodon. He's picked up a Dauntless Bodyguard here, and he can potentially use that Dauntless Bodyguard immediately to help convoke. When you've got these convoke creatures, any 1 mana creature you've got effectively kind of free when you're figuring out how many things that you can play in any given turn.
Yeah, so the main line that Marcio has to be thinking about is to deploy the Bodyguard, for example, protecting the Venerated Loxodon, then using all his creatures to convoke out a second Loxodon. Yes, he does lose a bit of damage if he does that, for example, those 4 points of damage, but that would give him the most power on board afterwards.
Yeah, and this is kind of a nice ability to go both wide and tall with Venerated Loxodon pumping things up.
And you can actually see, that he opted for 4 points of damage to be in the vicinity of threatening lethal next turn.
Shivan Fire there, dealing with the Dauntless Bodyguard before it gets a chance to untap.
And now we are looking at 8, 10 points of damage. So if Marcio hits the City's Blessing somehow, and Luis, for some reason, doesn't have a blocker available, then at least in theory, he has lethal damage available to him.
But I mean, look at the amount of damage that Luis has represented here. He's already got 9 spells in his graveyard. He's got another copy of Crackling Drake to draw him into something. He's found his first Ice Phoenix of the game. He's got some more mana to work with here, so those Crackling Drakes could get even larger here.
Yeah, to me it looks like he's not going for a win this turn, but rather he's setting up a very, very safe 2-turn victory here.
Yeah, giant set of attacks. Crackling Drake reducing Marcio Carvalho down to single digits, and those single digits crucially smaller than what Luis is threatening for future turns. And that's it. Luis Scott-Vargas picking up the second win, so it's 2-1 to Scott-Vargas. If we were in regulation play at any other point earlier in the tournament, that would be the match over. As things stand, once we hit our top 8 of these Mythic Championships, that is when we are playing best of 5, which means that for Marcio Carvalho, there's still a chance. He needs to win 2 on the bounce if he's going to get past Hall of Famer Luis Scott-Vargas. We, of course, get a chance to jump across to our other quarterfinal match going on. It's 1-1 here between Yoshihiko, Ikawa, and Michael Bonde. These players, they've gone to their sideboards, and Michael Bonde's sideboard, we've seen it happen all weekend long. It can put some interesting question marks for opponents because he has the potential to bring in a lot of creatures if he so chooses.
Yes, but we have to talk about the creatures on the Esper side first, because that is 4 copies of Thief of Sanity. So this is kind of what you are expecting after board, and your sideboarding has to respect the potential of a turn 3 Thief.
Yeah, just a couple little bits sorting out there. Early doors, there is nothing more than simply getting lands into play for Michael Bonde. He wants to make sure that he has at least the threat of counter magic for an early Thief of Sanity. Both these players working with full information on what the deck lists are for their opponents. They've had a chance to study overnight exactly the 75 that each player's brought to the table. Chemist's Insight there getting countered by Negate. Kawa does not want to allow Bonde any opportunity to get up on cards in the early stages of this game. But Ikawa has not been able to get anything going in terms of the early Thief of Sanity plan.
Exactly.
For now, he's just had to go with aggro to Fairy.
Yeah, he also has only a single blue source, so that made it much more reasonable for him to just run out the Negate there. He cannot he cannot expect to cast multiple blue spells on Michael Bonde's turn anyway, and in a sense, the ability to just outdraw and outmana the control deck is one of the scariest things that the Simic Nexus deck does to Esper control players. So Chemisters Insight, well, yes, it will be cast again, is actually one of the scariest cards to face.
So here we have, I think, is this our first creature of the match thus far? Oh, sorry, there was one in game one. This is Hydroid Krasis coming along. Hydroid Krasis, a real problem for a lot of control decks because, yes, you can counter it, yes, you can kill it, but that cast trigger means that it always represents some value. Michael Bonde there, casting it with X being equal to 4, gets to draw a couple of cards, gain a couple of life, and uncounterable card drawing against control seems pretty potent to me.
Absolutely, and now Ikawa actually has Teferi plus potential mana for Absorb or Mortify available. Bonde with that Atsukan Archer, which certainly doesn't look great here. It would have been able to block, of course, a Thief of Sanity, but otherwise it's not a card that does much in the matchup. However, Nezahal is another topic.
Yeah, Nezahal Primal Tide, a very interesting one. We have a new 7-mana blue N card that is potentially going to be a problem for Ikawa. Can't be countered, big body, and means that whenever Ikawa's casting non-creature spells, which, to be clear, is essentially his entire deck, that means that Bonde gets to draw cards. Also, even once it's on the battlefield, pretty tricky to remove because if Bonde so chooses, he can start discarding cards to return it, to exile it, sort of flicker it out the way. Duress here from Ikawa, though, that one's a solid one against the likes of Simic Nexus.
Yeah, and it's especially well-timed because this is the kind of turns where you're getting scared of end-of-turn Nexus, where you don't know if you can afford to tap out again, or what you should even counter. Is it the Nexus itself, or is it the follow-up?
Yeah, so in addition to being able to force one of those copies of Nexus of Fate to get shuffled in here, what Ikawa is gaining is a fairly large amount of information about how future turns are likely to play out. It means that he can meter the cards in his hand to the threats being played by Michael Bonde much, much more effectively.
And I do have to say that while Nezahal is certainly a good card against control, it's not the end-all be-all. You just -3 your Teferi, or you can even start to fight against it with your removal spells. It's certainly possible to kill a Nezahal or to not immediately die to it.
And Search for Azcanta, another piece of the puzzle that is pretty important to Ikawa getting things going here in this post-sideboard game. These players, each one game apiece thus far, and I love the gestures that you see from Ikawa when he's saying, yes, a spell resolves. It's almost like he's pumping his fist for his opponent, saying, you're so lucky you get to resolve a spell. Yes, enjoy it, because it might not happen again. Michael Bonde here. He's both thinking about what his plays are, but one must presume as well there's a certain amount of kind of information battling here, like how much do I reveal of what I've been drawing into versus playing the things that my opponent knows I have going on. Search for Azcanta coming down. I can't imagine that one's going to be too scary for Ikawa. He does have copies of Mortify in hand and does fire one off pretty much immediately there to deal with the legendary enchantment before it can get too much going on.
Well, Mortify is certainly a key card to turn this matchup around. If there was another card that was just aimed at creatures or creatures and planeswalkers, the matchup would be close to hopeless for Esper Control.
And here comes a Thought Erasure, dealing hopefully with more cards in Michael Bonde's hand. Also continuing the theme that we saw from Duress of making sure that Ikawa knows what's up. There will not be too many surprises for him when he gets to get another look at the other hand. And you see briefly there Michael Bonde considering negate and does go for it. He was there was the kind of the pump fake there of extending his hand to be viewed and have something taken from it thanks to Thought Erasure. But now Bonde is asking a question of Ikawa of whether or not he wants to get into a counter war here.
And that has to be because of the difference between Duress and Thought Erasure. Thought Erasure is actually threatening the Nezahal. So Bonde gets to protect that at the cost of not being able to cast Chemisters Insight this turn.
All right, counter war has happened. Negates on both sides means that, yes, Thought Erasure will be able to get things done. Axelkan Archer, that one not too much of a worry. Growth Spiral, I mean, it's a nice card, but it's not a super powerful card. Nezahal goes away, and now it's Nexus of Fate, Growth Spiral, and that Archer left for Michael Bonde here, and Ikawa in a nice spot.
Very nice spot once again, grinding away at the resources of Bonde. You can see here why declining to take, for example, a Nexus of Fate and instead going after Chemist's Insight is a smart play on the control side.
Lots of smart play here from Ikawa. You can see that this is, I mean, I think that more so than for any other type of deck, control players, once they've got a good control deck in their hands, they just look like they're having the best time. And Ikawa, we've seen him all weekend in the feature match area, having an awesome time with what is a very, very potent deck indeed in this format.
And he likes his other matchups too. So if he can get over this pretty bad matchup, then we are certainly looking at somebody that could claim the title here.
Yeah, it's very hotly contested. Someone gets to be the winner of Mythic Championship 1, and wow, this is not somewhere that I expected to see a whole lot of fight. So we have Axiom Archer coming down, cast down on it. Let's counter that one. We need that 1 power reach creature in play, and yeah, it's going to hang around, at least for now. Strange stuff here in our feature match area.
Yeah, and that's of course because Teferi is very close to ultimating. So if Bonde doesn't get in there for a point of damage, then that ultimate is effectively ending the game.
Yeah, the Archer principally there to deal with Thief of Sanity, being a great blocker for flyers. I mean, honestly, it's more there for the mono-blue matchup than anything else. Fighting a creature as a 1/4, pretty decent when there's a bunch of 1/1 flyers around. 2/2 flyers, it can just stand in the way of.
I'm surprised that Bonde even brought it in. As scary as Thief of Sanity is, I think a 1/4 reach creature is not what you want to have against that, not in this matchup, because you can just expect Ikawa to have answers to the Archer. So ultimately, I prefer much more to rely on Crushing Canopy. Of course, you bring in the Hydroid Crazes and the Negates, and then you just have to hope that the number of answers you have for Thief of Sanity is higher than the amount of thieves you are facing. By the way, not a single thief to be seen anywhere in this first sideboarded game.
Michael Bonde here, his draw has been kind of a clunky one. He has had a lot of draws of Nexus of Fate, which there's certainly a time in the game where that's exactly what you want. We've not yet hit that time of the game. He's not yet found his 7th source of mana, meaning that all of those 7-drop copies of Nexus of Fate, that every time they go away get shuffled in, they're not working out for him. Here's Mortify to deal with the Archer. That means that Teferi is threatening the ultimate this very next turn. I don't think that there's going to be a whole lot that Michael Bonde can do about that. Has to find something good on the top of his deck. He does find a land, he does pay a couple of mana, and that essentially means that if there was nothing from Ikawa, he would get a rebuy on this draw, but I'm not even sure that that's going to be true.
Yeah, so this is one of these spots where you can counter Nexus of Fate, but at the same time you don't have to, because you can just counter the one card that Bonde draws next turn, if that's even necessary.
Yeah, not too many ways that Bonde can get out of this, even if the Nexus of Fate wasn't countered. I mean, I guess if you drew into... yeah, I think that mana becomes an issue. If you drew into card drawing that could then let you cast multiple copies of Blink of an Eye, that might be interesting. But, I mean, this way around Ikawa, he's going to get to start doing the Emblem Tango with Teferi in play.
Yeah, you just -8. Maybe you have a card draw spell, maybe not, but Bonde will be forced to concede the game very soon after. There might still be a little bit of a dance where Bonde asks Ikawa what his win condition is after sideboarding, because in game 1 it's Karn. It's not clear what it is in game 2, so Bonde might want to get a little bit of extra information before conceding.
Yeah, I mean, for example, discovering that your opponent has brought in Lyra Dawnbringer would be something of pretty high value to Bonde. So there's the emblem, there's a search for Azcanta. No permanent exile just yet, but that's only really a matter of time. And Ikawa with just a Glacial Fortress in hand, there's the possibility that Bonde can piece something together here, but it's not super easy. Discards a Memorial to Genius in order to be able to jumpstart a Chemist's Insight. Dig, dig, dig. Looks like we might have an opt coming along as well now. That the original invasion printing of the instant speed card drawer. As soon as Ikawa has an additional way of drawing extra cards, it becomes very difficult for Bonde to get anything going here. Just the regular draw step from Ikawa will be enough to take out one of the lands of Bonde, who doesn't have, for his deck, a terrifyingly high amount of lands in play.
There's Chemist's Insight, so that's threatening 2 or later 4 more permanents on Bonde's side.
Yeah, Ikawa here in utterly dominant position. The advantage bar stretched as far as it can go to one side, and it's just really a matter of how much information Michael Bonde can wait to extract, I would imagine.
Ikawa has to trigger his emblem. He was about to play his land, so maybe a little bit too quick there. I'm guessing that he activated Escanta in his upkeep in the case that he decides to flip the other one, and that way he has that additional 1 extra mana available to him.
Plays Chemist's Insight, draws a couple of cards, gets rid of a couple of lands here. Start off with the lands that tap for multiple colors of mana. That's sort of good business for the Esper control list here. And Michael continues to draw cards, but he needs to be playing lands each and every turn here just to sort of keep his head above water for a little bit longer. And ultimately, he does to scoop them up. At this point, it was essentially a foregone conclusion. It may be that there was a brief exchange between the two players just to make sure that they had the information when essentially wasting each other's time. So going into game 4, it's actually Ikawa who finds himself up as we get into the post-sideboarded games.
Yeah, he has to be thrilled about that. It's not an unwinnable matchup, but it is the matchup he definitely didn't want to face in this top 8.
And now we get a chance to see still more of our matchup between Marcio Carvalho and Luis Scott-Vargas. For those of you joining us partway through, first of all, welcome. Second of all, you will want to check out the games that we've had thus far between these two because they have been absolutely fantastic. But also, right now, it is Marcio Carvalho who needs to win 2 on the bounce if he's going to get past Luis Scott-Vargas and potentially fulfill that dream of picking up the trophy at the Mythic Championship here in Cleveland, Ohio. Early Tithe Taker coming from Carvalho. No 1-drop, though, and from Luis Scott-Vargas, an early Chart A course.
Draws into a Phoenix, had another one in hand already. So that could be a very explosive draw, but without Goblin Electromancer, casting 3 spells a turn is actually a lot more difficult.
History Benalia coming along here. That will generate a knight and still more knights. And looking at what it is that Marcio has going on, he's got some of the kind of the high-cost threats that make the Azorius deck potentially very scary. He's got Benalish Marshal and Venerated Loxodon that he can be playing with soon enough. In the meantime, though, a Lava Coil, a nice answer to a Tithe Taker, dealing with it without allowing any afterlife. And for now, at least, this is Luis making sure that the board is comparatively clear on his opponent's side of things, limiting the potency of what Marcio can get going in these early stages.
Yeah, and Luis really not saving on those spells, rather saying that an early board advantage is not something that he wants to give Marcio, because as we've seen, if Marcio is allowed to go wide and Luis is on a low life total, it's actually possible for the Azorius aggro deck to win kind of this late game. Whereas if Luis can stabilize on a high life total with only few threats on Marcio's side, then Luis will be able to take over.
Now, there's an interesting sideboard card there, Murmuring Mystic from Luis Scott-Vargas. That means that he actually has the potential to go wide in these post-sideboarded games. 1/5 means that it's big enough to block most things coming from the Azorius list pretty handily, and then generating these Bird Illusion tokens by casting spells. Luis was wanting to cast a whole bunch of spells anyway, so it just fits very, very neatly into his overall plan.
Absolutely, and he has some of his best friends, but also some of the brightest minds in Magic, of course, helping him test this matchup in particular. He knew that he would need all the help he could get playing against Marcio Carvalho, and that is definitely a card where once sideboards are completely known, you can even know exactly when to block and or how aggressively to play the Mystic here.
And there's just the one copy of Murmuring Mystic in the sideboard. We've seen Luis Scott-Vargas in the past with some, what I like to refer to as cheeky one-offs in the sideboard. And they do get additional value once you hit this top 8 kind of a scenario and deck lists are known. It just gives your opponent that many more things to have to think and play around. And yeah, the Murmuring Mystic coming along here potentially could be very good because while Venerated Lockstone can pump things up, Luis has the potential to generate a lot of blockers here, whether it be ground attackers or attackers in the air coming from Marcio Carvalho.
Yeah, Marcio did force through a little bit of damage, did get a Lockstone down, so is now going wide with pretty beefy creatures actually. And Bird Illusion tokens are not enough on their own to hold the fort for too long.
Lava Coil once again coming along to deal with what's going on the other side of things. And it looks like this is going to be one of those turns where we see 3 spells being played, the Shock being the third one there for Luis Scott-Vargas. That means that in addition to the 3 birds, he's got an Arc like Phoenix, which is a Phoenix, not a bird.
Yeah, but it's still huge. Now we have a 1/5 against a 4/4. We have a recurring Phoenix against a Night token potentially. But also we have these 1/1s who can just chump block for so long that Luis, if he finds, for example, a Crackling Drake, can potentially just turn this thing around easily.
So Marcio there, no real point him getting attacks in. They weren't really going to achieve very much. Instead, elects to play another copy of Venerated Lockstone, pumping up his team a little bit, meaning the first Venerated Lockstone now big enough that it's killing anything on the other side of the battlefield. But Luis, he got a turn off, and that means that he gets a chance to make some big plays this turn, and he goes for an Entrancing Melody on a token, just 2 mana to steal what is a 4/4 creature. 2 more spells being cast, gets another Arc-like Phoenix going on here. Oh, sorry, maybe that was just actually a Phoenix being cast from hand here.
It was.
The rare alternate casting cost of the Mythic rare coming down for Luis Scott-Vargas. And he gets to start attacking in here. And his attacks are not going to take very long to close things out. And that's Luis Scott-Vargas taking the win there. 3 games to 1, the victory over Marcio Carvalho. Luis Scott-Vargas, he gets a chance to have a little bit of rest, have a bit of a break, very carefully watch the other quarterfinal that we have going on in our feature match area because he now knows that his opponent in the next round will be one of those 2. He confided that he feels like both of those matchups might be kind of tough for him, but he gets to get a little bit more information about how they might play that out.
Yeah, tough luck for Marcio. First after Swiss, couldn't get there against one of the best players of all time. Luis Scott-Vargas showing that he knows how Magic works with a deck that not many were expecting, but that has served him very well this weekend.
And we can see here that in the time it took for that final game to be played between Marcio Carvalho and Luis Scott-Vargas, these guys, you know, they barely had time to go to their sideboards, double-check things, and shuffle up. We have a mulligan here for Michael Bonde, who is on the wrong side of things here. He needs to win 2 on the bounce if he's going to be able to make it through to play against 10-time top 8er and Hall of Famer Luis Scott-Vargas. And that is going to mean that he's going to have to string a few together. He's going to, you know, make sure that everything works out just great. And on a mulligan, everything already not perhaps working out as well as he might have hoped. Does elect to keep Scry to the top, keeps a land on top there. And yeah, there we go. It plays things out. We are good to start. We are all over this. Hinterland Harbour, the first land coming down, and an isolated chapel on the other side of things. And the hand for Ikawa, an interesting one. He's got 2 copies of Search for Azcanta. The first one, very important. The second one, maybe slightly less so. Chemist's Insight, also a big deal, but no early hand disruption from Ikawa here. And that one of the ways that he can potentially derail what Bonda has going on.
Yeah, and the hand of Michael Bonde, it was a mulligan to 5. He had to scry a land to the top, that was the forest, and suddenly he's there with 4 lands on turn 3. So actually his draw developed quite nicely. However, it is still a deck that wants a critical mass of cards. So you want all that mana to overload what the control deck is trying to do. And, well, Bonde needs those Chemist's Insight at some point to catch up.
He does. He does have the potential to get Sinister Sabotage up relatively soon. He's got a Hydroid Crisis that, if he can get enough lands in play, will represent a good source of card drawing and indeed potentially a threat for a little bit. In the meantime, it's so funny. It looks like Ikawa's missed land drops. No, it's just that Michael Bonde's had extras, and Ikawa just passing things back here. He's got his Search for Us counter online, just needs to look to meaningfully interact with what the Danish player on the right of our screen has going on here. Hydroid Crisis for 3.
Doesn't want to wait for a potential land number 6 here.
No, and I think that when you're a little bit behind things off the mulligan, you take what you can get, and Bonde doing exactly that. And what he could get was 1 life, 1 card off the top of his deck, 1 card out of his opponent's hand, that being a cast down to deal with his threat.
I mean, another argument is when you're behind on cards, you want all the cards you can get. So I would have preferred to see 2 cards drawn off of that Crisis.
Speaking of 2 cards drawn, Chemist's Insight coming from Ikawa here, who he's found himself a Teferi, and he's got the lands that he'll be able to play it relatively soon here. We've seen some pretty aggressive Teferis coming from Yoshihiko Okawa, and I really like that line in this particular matchup.
Yep, and that is not only because you get it down, you get all those extra cards, you get a little bit of mana advantage, but also it's just that much faster to threaten ultimate. And in the end, if we're ignoring Thief of Sanity, that ultimate of Teferi is exactly how you can win the game.
Thought Rager getting countered here by Sinister Sabotage. It's going to be Bonde that's the one that gets to do some surveillance here. Surveil pretty important given that he's relying so heavily on the top of his deck to be able to get things going. But Thief of Sanity coming down. We talked about it last game as being a potential after sideboard. Didn't see it there. This time around, though, Ikawa does have a powerful threat to deal with what it is that Michael Bonde has going on. Now, explain to us, Simon, exactly why it is that Thief of Sanity is so rough for Bonde.
Yes. So the problem with Thief of Sanity in this matchup is that almost anything that Ikawa hits is very, very dangerous for you. Wilderness Reclamation is a nightmare. Nexus of Fate just means more hits of Thief of Sanity and potentially the chance for Esper Control to go infinite on you. And then finally, there's all this card draw and counter magic. So if your Sinister Sabotages are stolen by Thief of Sanity, then you're just falling further and further behind.
So here we see a crisis coming down for Michael Bonde because he wants to make sure that he's not going to be facing too many attacks from Thief of Sanity. And now for Ikawa, it becomes kind of interesting because he's in a place where getting rid of creatures on the battlefield somehow seems far more important than ever previously it had, because he wants to get those juicy, juicy cards off the top of Michael Bonde's deck.
Mm-hmm. Something that's really cool, you see a Teferi being tried here for Ikawa. If you -3 a Crisis, your Thief of Sanity is guaranteed to snatch it.
Yum, yum, yum. I like that play a lot. But as things stand, Negate stopping Teferi and Chemist's Insight drawing more cards for Michael Bonde. Not out of the woods yet, Ikawa, even though he's managed to find the Thief of Sanity, because there's a lot of land in play. There is a Wilderness Reclamation now for Michael Bonde. He's got a Chemist's Insight in the graveyard, so he's got a lot of potential to potentially get back in this game. Even another copy of Chemist's Insight in hand.
Okay, but no counter magic right now. He used up all his mana during his main phase, so didn't have an incentive to already cast something here. But if we see a second Teferi come down, we are very likely going to see a Chemist's Insight in respawn just to try to find something.
Now, it must be said that Yoshihiko Ikawa does still have answers to the likes of that Wilderness Reclamation. He does have access to Mortify, and when we look at his hand, he's actually got a few decisions to make because there are so many good cards that he can be considering between what's in his hand and indeed a Chemist's Insight in the graveyard.
Yeah. But here you can see the power of Chemist's Insight because Ikawa has now made a decision to play against the cards that are on the battlefield, but suddenly Bonde will be redrawing almost, well, not quite a full hand, but half a hand, half a starting hand here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that one of the nice things when you're playing a deck with as much card drawing as this is that while you do need critical mass on cards, if you're mulliganing, assuming you get to cast your card drawing, you can kind of reset those mulligans to some extent. What do we have now from Michael Bonde? Straight Fire coming off the top of his deck by the looks of things, still able to get things cast. those Chemist's insights mean that every time that he draws what would otherwise be kind of dead draws in more basic lands, for example, he can turn them into still more card drawing. And I like having the Search for Azcanta in play quite a bit when it comes to this Simic Nexus deck. It's one of the decks that can really utilize the power of that Azcanta the Sunken Ruin better than most. And a very short window for Yoshihiko Okawa to deal with Search for Azcanta.
Absolutely. And this is I think this is the crunch moment here. We see Ikawa potentially transforming Azcanta, has that Teferi play available to him. The most obvious line is -3 your Krasis, attack with Thief of Sanity, and that should be a big advantage. And then Bonde has to see, does he have a Sinister Sabotage as his final card? Maybe a negate? If not, where are we going from there? Okay, it's not a negate.
Well, cast down makes it much, much easier for Ikawa in some respects, because it means that he's now still got the mana up to be able to cast Teferi. He still gets to do some good work with his Thief of Sanity, gradually sculpting a second hand of cards exiled from the top of Michael Bonder's deck. And he also gets to use Teferi to put Search for Azcanta 3 down for Michael Bonder here.
Yeah. And you see the respect for Search for Azcanta, or rather the respect for Azcanta, the Sunken Ruin, because that is such a difficult card to deal with for the control deck. You would much rather have it tucked away, and then Thief of Sanity is going to take care of it.
So Michael Bonder, he does have a lot of mana. He does have access to Nexus of Fate here, alongside a Precognitive Perception. Goes for the Perception by the looks of things here, because... Oh, no. Is it going to be the Nexus? He does go for the Nexus. Little pump of the fist there from Ikawa. He's just going to let that one happen. Precognitive Perception, an interesting one. If he gets to Perception for 5 mana, find a Wilderness Reclamation, he can then still cast his Nexus of Fate and potentially get something going. And when
isn't that exactly the reason why you shouldn't cast your Nexus of Fate?
I would imagine so, yeah. I mean, it feels to me like Precognitive Perception, it digs so deep.
You want to cast Nexus of Fates when you have a board that allows you to do more things than play a land drop and draw a card. So I really don't understand this line of play if you're playing to win the game. Of course, you get one more turn this way, but that shouldn't be Bonde's main goal here.
So Hydroid Krasis, when your opponent has a Teferi on 1 that can't immediately deal with it on its own, looks pretty attractive. Make a blocker for that Thief of Sanity. But I do still like the notion of playing for the win here with a Precognitive Perception. You just get to go so deep when you cast that instant at sorcery speed on your own turn, potentially set up something very large indeed.
But that line is not available anymore, because the Nexus of Fate is now gone. So if you go for it now, then you are just very likely getting hit by Thief of Sanity next turn. So it's a lot, well, it's available, but it's a lot weaker now that you don't have that ability to cast Nexus of Fate in your hand step. I really disagree with the... Yeah, I think it was wasteful. It was a wasteful use of Nexus of Fate there.
Okay, so 5 mana being tapped here. It seems unlikely to be an X=3 Hydroid Krasis. There are certainly occasions where you don't tap out fully for Hydroid Krasis, but... All right, Precognitive Perception here. So because it's being cast in the main phase, Addendum is live. That means that we get to scry 3, then draw 3. So
that's 2 reclamations.
That's interesting.
By the way, once you have a Wilderness Reclamation, that Memorial to Genius also becomes live. Of course, it's live right now, but you can't afford to just draw cards with it. But once you have the Reclamation online, things turn around.
So there is Wilderness Reclamation, and I think that he's drawn into a Nexus of Fate.
He found a Nexus, like
just rewarded.
If he didn't find that Nexus, it would have been quite the catastrophe, and that's why I was advocating for not casting it earlier. But this is a big deal.
This is absolutely gigantic. There is now a much, much stronger potential for Michael Bonde to be able to win this game, stay in this match. His opponent fully tapped out here, and that means that Michael Bonde, he has used Precognitive Perception. He's been able to set up a good hand. He's got an extra turn in the bank, and this is exactly where things could go very, very poorly for Yoshihiko Okawa.
And look at his hand. I believe he even picked up a Crushing Canopy. So that Thief of Sanity is not a threat anymore.
Everything suddenly coming up Bonde here. It's amazing how quickly these things can turn around. Precognitive Perception, one of those cards that it's not as automatic an inclusion in these Nexus lists as many of the other cards from Ravnica Allegiance, but we saw its potency there. A gigantic Hydroid Crisis being played, and if you're a Kawa, you kind of know that part of what's going on here is that there's a very real chance that you might not get any more turns. Absolutely. You can see him there. He's just having to sit back and watch what's going on here. Yep, that's a smile and a nod as you untap all of your lands, Michael Bonde. Do you have a way of taking another turn here? First up, a growth spiral. I mean, these are kind of the rub-ins when it comes to what the Nexus deck can do. Any mana over and above what you can do simply with casting Nexus of Fate is just still more card drawing. I'm not
digging for a Nexus of Fate there.
Yeah, I'm not sure he does have the extra Nexus of Fate just yet.
No.
But even now, so Growth Spiral, that's one more card. The one more card is the Nexus.
With exactly 7.
This is a gigantic draw there for Michael Bonde. Each and every turn that he's able to use this Nexus, he's getting real advantage. He's got the Hydroid Crisis in play. I mean, he's going to need a few turns to actually kill off Okawa here. But, I mean, all credit to Yoshihiko Okawa here. Smile on his face. The fates are in the hands of Michael Bonde here, whether or not he can find himself drawing still more copies of the card drawing spell.
Well, Ikawa knows that his Teferi is dead, so that's already a big blow. And then Bonde gets to draw a card in his draw step, has that Memorial to Genius in play, so it's getting slimmer and slimmer.
As is Bonde's library, meaning that it's more and more likely that Nexus of Fate will be somewhere near the top. So many lands in play here for Michael Bonde, the Danish player, who is just clinging on here and potentially forcing a game 5.
That's what it looks like, Tim.
Ikawa, he did a lot of things right in this game, but it may well be that it does not matter as Michael Bonde has been able to get things going with this Simic Nexus deck. One of the exciting things that I love about this deck is that it can have these moments where it's able to completely turn a game around, and that's exactly what we're seeing here in this game 4. First up, let's kill Teferi. No problem with that whatsoever. There is another copy of Teferi in hand for Yoshihiko Okawa, but he may never get a chance to cast it here.
I mean, as nice as it would be to take infinite turns, Bonde doesn't really have to. He can just cast Nazahal, untap all his lands, cast Crushing Canopy on Thief of Sanity, and he's never losing that game from that board position.
Finds Blink of an Eye.
Looks like he wants more.
Yeah, I think that Simic Nexus might be one of the decks that if you consider yourself a slightly greedy player, there's definitely some greedy lines that you can take with this one. I mean, for a kickoff, you get to take all the turns. What's greedier than that?
22, I think I beat 4. 22,
And they're just keeping track of the different colors of mana here. We've got a island and a forest sleeve that we're just going to make sure that everything's noted down on. A lot of mana available to Michael Bonde thanks to this Wilderness Reclamation. Uses Blink of an Eye to deal with the Thief of Sanity on the other side of things. Then gets to untap his various lands. What happens next? Memorial drawing a couple of cards. I don't know that this is going to be another turn taken here by Michael Bonde, but the damage very much done. Passes things back. One question mark that we still have is exactly what the card is available to Yoshihiko Okawa hidden under that Thief of Sanity.
Bonde decided not to use Crushing Canopy, even though he has it as a way to deal with the Thief. Instead using Blink of an Eye, which is a card that you can also use on your own permanent. So resetting something like a Hydroid Crisis and just recasting it against Esper control, definitely a very valid option.
I love the artwork on Crushing Canopy, by the way. The little bug that doesn't even realize that there's a building about to attack it. 2 copies of Chemist's Insight in the graveyard for Ikawa, so he gets to discard a Search for Azcanta in order to dig a little deeper, hopefully find something that he's going to be able to get going against the likes of what Michael Bonde has going on here. And if you're Ikawa here, is there a temptation to run out the Thief of Sanity just as something that gives Michael Bonde a pause about attacking?
We have entered a stage, Tim, where you are not fighting against Wilderness Reclamation or mana anymore. That fight is lost. However, you still are fighting for maybe preventing Bonde from taking all the turns. So now your main cards you want to fight against are mostly Search for Azcanta. But of course, a card like Nezahal is also a big issue.
Yeah, Nezahal, uncounterable, and is now a big source of card drawing for Michael Bonde.
Much better in this matchup than in the Simic Nexus mirror match, because then if your opponent goes off and takes all the turns, yes, you are drawing a lot of cards, but you also die to decking.
Well, presumably at some point you can discard 3 of the cards that you've drawn to stop yourself drawing more.
Well, it depends. Like, sometimes you just can't. Well, then you're losing anyway, right? It's
I guess, yeah.
It doesn't help you that it's drawing cards because you have to tap out to cast it. That's basically the issue.
And Bonde here, so much mana available to him. Has 2 copies of Wilderness Reclamation now, which means that he gets to... I mean, the reason that Wilderness Reclamation is so powerful is that you get to untap your lands at the beginning of your end step, but you still have a chance to use that mana to cast instants on your turns. You can kind of stack up absolutely loads of mana, and that's kind of what we've seen Michael Bonde doing the whole time here.
Yep.
Get a Nexus of Fate going, and that enough for Yoshihiko Ikawa to scoop up his cards. We are going to have a Game 5, Simon. So we're going to get a chance to have a little look at the sideboards of these players as they prepare for their next game. So first up, let's have a little look at what Yoshihiko Ikawa is working with. He, on the Esper control list, has a whole bunch of cards that he can be considering. Let's have a little look at them. We've seen Thief of Sanity. One interesting one that I believe we did see brought in that didn't actually get played was Kaya Orzhov Usurper, able to deal with various cards in the graveyard.
Yeah, surely it does take care of Chemist's Insight. That is relevant, and it can delay Search for Azcanta from transforming. So that is actually probably more relevant than something like Karn would offer you. The main cards that you see are the 7 cards that are coming in for sure. Negate, 2 Duresses, and all the Thief of Sanity. I think that Ikawa conceded there with the Lyra Dawnbringer on the in the hand.
Yes.
I don't understand why you would want Lyra Dawnbringer, even if I expect my opponent to bring in Hydroid Krasis or Nezahal or Biogenic Ooze. I don't see how the Angel is helping there. I much prefer Hostage Taker if you are sure about that sideboarding plan.
Yeah, Hostage Taker, obviously spectacular in matchups where you're anticipating a whole bunch of creatures, somewhat less so the rest of the time. And unfortunately, in this particular matchup, there's a lot of different things to prepare for. It's a little bit of a merry dance in terms of how the sideboarding is going to go and what that means that your sideboarding should look like. On the other side of things here, this is what Michael Bonde is working with. We've seen that he's brought in at least 1 Atsukan Archer thus far. We've seen Nezahal the Primal Tide. Negates and Crushing Canopies, they seem like they have a lot of use here. And then Biogenic Ooze, that's a card that we've seen Michael Bonde put to fantastic use in other matchups across the course of the day. Intrigued as to whether or not it's something that he would be considering in this particular matchup.
I don't think so. I don't think that's where you want to go. It is a 5-mana card that runs into Counter Magic, and even if you get the 2/2 Ooze token, but your opponent has a removal spell, that is not going to win you the game. What I like, well, I don't like Atsukan Archer. What I like is Crushing Canopy. I think Hydroid Krasis and Nezahal are very easy inclusions, as are the 2 Negates. And then you can think about going for creatures to extend your mana capabilities. So not only relying on Growth Spiral, but also bringing in something like Incubation Druid. But you don't really know if your opponent is taking out all that creature removal. So I don't like being too reliant on creatures.
Interesting split between Incubation Druid and Druid of the Cowl there. Which Elf Druid is the best? They both cost 2. They both tap for a mana. I guess that one is something that Michael Bonde might be able to fill us in on after this tournament.
It very much depends on the matchup. So Incubation Druid is definitely better in this matchup, but sometimes you just want something that doesn't die to shock and that can block a 2-1 on the other side.
All right, but these players are good to kick off now. It's going to be Ichikawa on the draw, Yoshihiko Ikawa on the draw, rather, in this final game. This doesn't feel to me like a matchup where play draw is super important unless it works out that Bonde has one of his most explosive starts.
Well, it's one of these things where being on the play draw is not important if the game plays out, let's say, in a regular fashion, but Thief of Sanity turns that on its head. Against Thief of Sanity, you always want to be on the play, so that, for example, you can kick that blink of an eye, or that you have time to draw into, cast more growth spirals to draw into Crashing Canopy and those kind of cards.
So we have a full-on Thief of Sanity game going on here. It's been played, it's been bounced, it's been replayed. There's yet another one in hand for Yoshihiko Ikawa, and he's going to be able to very much push the tempo this early game, force Michael Bonde to interact rather than sculpting a hand. And it's by sculpting a hand that Michael Bonde can most easily win most of his matchups. I'm going to be very intrigued to see how this plays out in the next couple of turns, as Ikawa potentially is able to get a few good hits in here with successive Thieves.
Yeah, and if these hits are not absolute blanks, we're talking about 3 lands or really uncastable spells, then Thief of Sanity is going to take over this game very, very quickly.
So, I mean, that was close to a miss with Thief of Sanity. It saw 2 lands and a Growth Spiral. But Growth Spiral, I mean, still a fine card to be getting there. You get a card draw. I mean, you potentially get extra lands in play sooner than you might otherwise. But double Thief of Sanity, this could get messy for Michael Bonde if he's not able to get something going.
Oh, it already is very messy. Ikawa is sitting there with a negate. If he ever gets to untap, he's going to have 2 counters available. And even if those Thieves didn't have this great ability when they connect, it would still be 4 power in the air, pressuring Bonde with a wall of counter magic on the Esper control side.
Good start for Yoshihiko Ikawa. Let's see whether or not he can turn it into a good finish. Michael Bonde, he has to try it. He throws out at least 1 blocker. He's going to gain a couple of life, draw some cards from this 2-2. Sorry, gain 1 life, draw 1 card from this 2-2 Hydroid Crisis. Did
Ikawa opt not to Growth Spiral? You said it's a Growth Spiral,
I
right?
believe it is, yeah.
We're not entirely sure, but it would be weird that he didn't cast that.
It may just be that he wants to maintain the fiction that it could be something scarier.
Sure. I mean, I don't know if that's worth that much, but...
he also didn't have an additional land in hand to put in play, so it would have been a straightforward 2-mana cycle. Gradually, still more cards getting exiled. One of the things that makes Thief of Sanity so potent, the cards that get exiled, you can see them there on screen, they are still available to be cast even if the Thief of Sanity gets dealt with. It's not like they're tied to the creature once they get exiled. They just remain in exile, ready to be cast using any color of mana for the rest of the game. Here comes Teferi. I like this kind of aggro Esper approach in this somewhat daunting matchup. Ikawa able to untap a couple of lands now, meaning he's got full ability to interact with what Michael Bonde has going on here. Bonde has been developing his mana base quite nicely and has a lot of cards in hand. He casts Wilderness Reclamation and has enough mana for a negate backup in the face of an Absorb on the other side of things.
That was Ikawa saying, I will deploy Teferi and I have counter backup. But Bonde, of course, knows, and this is part of the game plan after sideboarding, if he can protect a Wilderness Reclamation the turn he plays it, then he gets that additional mana boost. Sometimes even enough to cast Nexus of Fate in the same turn. Not here, though, because, well, A, he doesn't have it in his hand, but B, he only has 6 and not 7 mana. Let's see if we can take a look at Ikawa's hand. He's playing them pretty close to the chest, but apart from that, Slew of Counter Magic doesn't have too much going for him.
Now, we've listed Growth Spiral in our key graveyard cards. It's not in his graveyard. It is one of the cards that has been hidden away, as is the Negate. So those are the 2 cards up the top of our screen that you see face down there. We're using the key graveyard cards here just so that you can see exactly everything it is that Yoshihiko Okawa was working with.
And we might be entering the final stages of this game because Michael Bonde tried to protect Wilderness Reclamation from Thief of Sanity with Precognitive Perception. Ikawa, of course, didn't allow that. He negated, and now Thief of Sanity, I'm 99% sure, is going to grab exactly that Reclamation. Bonde does not have counter magic available, so you just play that, and suddenly you're Esper control with an active Wilderness Reclamation, which is just absurd.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing that the amount that you'd have to stretch your mana base to be able to play that under traditional circumstances, too much for even the most seasoned of mana-based professionals. But when you just get to steal it from your opponent's deck and play it, very exciting. Does put a Wilderness Reclamation into the graveyard, though, so either that was that there were two of them within the top three, or Yoshihiko Okawa has a slightly different plan.
Yeah, he found a hard counter, so that Sinister Sabotage was what motivated him not to go for it. Did he? No, he didn't. Okay, he only cast the negate. I thought for a second here that he untapped lands, but of course he -3'd Teferi.
So here comes a Chemist's Insight, and Ikawa says, yeah, you can have the card drawing. I'm just going to counter your key threats. I'm the one with a couple of threats on the battlefield, and right now you can see where the advantage bar sits. It is not with Michael Bonde. Ikawa checking out hand number 2. Uses a Growth Spiral. Why not? Draws a Lyra Dawnbringer. In some respects, I feel like he's drawing better cards off the top of Bonde's deck than he is off his own. But the fact that he's drawing off both, pretty potent. Uses Sinister Sabotage. Gets to Surveil.
I also think that he's been holding a Duress for quite some time, which we will probably see pretty soon, unless I'm mistaken. No, it might be a Cast Down. Okay, yeah, that is, of course, a dead card right now.
Yoshihiko Okawa putting on a clinic with these copies of Thief of Sanity here. And if you're Michael Bonde, just having to watch all of your best spells get cast by your opponent, pretty demoralizing. More cards getting taken off the top of the deck there. And just the worst case scenario, you see 2 lands go to the graveyard. Like, can't you just once find, like, at least give me a Chemist's Insight somewhere in there. Here's Lyra Dawnbringer. Yoshihiko Okawa, he's potentially just going to close this game out with damage a little bit faster than Michael Bonde might reasonably have expected. All of a sudden, we have 7 points of damage flying through, and that represents a 2-turn clock to close out this match. Nexus of Fate is in hand for Michael Bonde, but he's got to be thinking that he's going to go for the one that's going to be safer to actually resolve here. Nezahal, Primal Tide coming along. And now we have a target for a cast down.
Not really, right? It's a legendary creature.
Oh, of course, yes. I apologize. Just an opt coming from Ikawa. Dig, dig, dig. Finds more lands. This Nezahal could be a fair few cards for Bonde if Ikawa decides to do anything more than simply flying over for damage. It might be that he pumps the brakes on casting spells at all and just decides to present a 2-turn clock.
Ikawa can attack. Ikawa can -3 the Nezahal, and then either Nezahal is in the library, or well, Bonde is out of cards. Ikawa doesn't have to cast anything to threaten lethal. So I don't really see this being a problem for Ikawa either way.
Yoshihiko Okawa, ladies and gentlemen, getting it done with the Thief of Sanity here. Just a single attack step left to be able to close out this game. Uses the last remaining loyalty on Teferi to put the ability on the stack. And Nezahal, well, 3 cards getting discarded there to keep the Primal Tide around. But it's going to need to be a very, very good set of draws here for Michael Bonde, because he's not got a whole lot of cards left in hand to work with from here. Not sure if he's in fact got any. Yeah, he's literally empty-handed, relying on the top of his deck, offering him the earth and everything on it. Meanwhile, Yoshihiko Okawa sat with a hand, including counter magic. He's got lethal threats on the battlefield. He's got another Teferi in play. He's got it all, and I believe that he is going to have a semi-final spot.
I agree.
Michael Bonde, though, gets back Nezahal, untaps. What could the draw possibly be?
You can dream. You can dream of your opponent not having any counter magic and you just drawing Nexus of Fates.
Yeah, just Nexus of Fate for, what, 4 successive turns and attack for 7 4 times? It's a nice dream, but I believe that the dream may well be over very, very shortly here. Michael Bonde here, not even with enough mana to be able to get anything going with the Chemist's Insight, really. Yoshihiko Okawa says, I'm going to let your dream live for now. You can have those cards. You can draw 3. You can even kill Teferi.
Yeah, you only counter something that would be threatening the Air Force.
And the Air Force coming in here soon enough. That is 7 points of damage on the air. Michael Bonde on 6, and there is the handshake. Yoshihiko Okawa picking up the win, 3-2 in a full 5-game set, and it will be Ikawa facing off against Luis Scott-Vargas in our second set of semi-finals. We have had some fantastic magic, Simon Gertzen, from our feature match area. It was Marcio Carvalho against Luis Scott-Vargas. That one, it went long, and it was Louise able to get there. We knew that the other match had the potential to go even longer, and all credit to Ikawa because we were concerned about his ability to win games before sideboarding. Because he was able to find a win pre-sideboarding, that gave him a little bit more latitude so that even when Michael Bonde was able to get things going with a win out of nowhere post-sideboarding in a game that looked very, very poorly for him, he was able to force the Game 5, and in Game 5, it was Ikawa able to take the victory. Absolutely fantastic stuff there. Any key highlights for you?
Well, that was for me the first real upset of the Sunday match play because I didn't think that Esper Control can win in a 5-game set. I think Thief of Sanity really showing its power. That Lyra, I mean, it was good for style points, but ultimately I think the Thieves would have taken it down on their own as well.
Spectacular finish there. Of course, all credit to both Marcio Carvalho and Michael Bonde making it into our top 8. Fantastic stuff from them, but we will not be seeing any more of them from this Mythic Championship, where once there were 8, now there's only 4. We'll get a chance to see our semi-finals soon enough, but for now, from the feature match area, it's all done. See you again soon.
Hello and welcome back to the Dudes X. Maria and Rich here. Well, our quarterfinals are in the books, and Brian David Marshall is on the floor with somebody who's very happy to have brought some arc lights out of retirement.
I'm here with Mythic Championship semifinalist Luis Scott-Vargas, Hall of Famer, and you just beat Marcio Carvalho. But the game I want to ask you about, not the 3 wins, it's that one game you lost there that was, to me, really kind of the best game to watch from a viewer perspective. Can you talk about that game a little bit?
Yeah, that was certainly the best game by far. Marcio mulliganed, but had triple 1-drop into turn 3 Ajani. And I didn't have an Electromancer on 2, which puts me in a huge hole. But I was able to string together enough, like, chart a course into next turn, chart a course into next turn, cantrip into opt into shock, or lava coil opt shock, and bring back a Phoenix. And then I actually got super, super lucky, like 5 different turns this game, where I'm like, radical idea with 1 mana untapped, Electromancer in play, into Phoenix to discard a Tormenting Voice, which is my 3rd spell, to then get back 3 Phoenixes. And then the next turn, top deck Beacon Bolt to kill 2 things, get back Phoenix, because every turn, because of the Ajani, I was chumping with all my Phoenixes. So basically I got like triple Phoenix by like turn 5, turn 4, turn 5, blocked with all of them for like 3 turns in a row, brought them all back 3 turns in a row, which is really hard for this deck to do, and then played 2 Crackling Drakes that were both 12/4s, but Marcio's at 38 because of all the Vampire tokens, and Adonto plus Ajani ended up killing me. Like, at one point I had to attack Ajani to prevent the ultimate. Like, it was a really sweet game. I was like hanging on for dear life, turn after turn, top decking perfectly. It wasn't quite enough to save me, but the other 3 games that I won were actually not that close.
All right, well, Luis Scott-Vargas, his 10th Mythic Championship, top 8, a Hall of Fame career since your Hall of Fame induction.
Yeah, I mean, I think some would say that. I've been, hitting the right side of, preparation meets luck in some of these tournaments for sure.
All right, well, I'm going to let you go prepare and maybe go get some food as we get ready for the semifinal. Any predictions for how this matchup plays out for you?
Oh, very badly for me. If I win, it'll be because I got lucky, and you can quote me on that.
All right, there you heard it. Luis Scott-Vargas heading into his semifinal match against Esper Control.
Thanks very much, Brian, and to Luis Scott-Vargas. We'll see him in the second semi-final. Plenty coming your way during lunch. We're going to have Gabriel Nassif and Matt Nass here to talk about the Mythic Invitational. Going to have Brian David Marshall here to talk about Brian David Marshall. That's actually going to be better than it sounds, to be fair. But before that, Maria, you've been busy.
Yeah, so not only has the Mythic Championship been going on right here all weekend, about, a couple 100 feet that way, there's also a Magic Fest going on. You've got cosplayers, you've got artists, you've got tons of wacky formats, and I went over there to check it out. I'm here at Mythic Championship Cleveland, where the players behind me are battling for top 8 here in day 2. But a few feet away, thousands of more players are competing in another tournament. Let's check it out. Here we are at Magic Fest Cleveland, where thousands of players are competing for a spot at a tournament exactly like what's going on right next door. Hey there, I see you've got a Grand Prix going on back here. Is there any way that I could register and get in?
You're a little late. We started about 6 hours ago.
Dang. I found some people playing Pauper over here. So what deck are you playing Pauper?
I'm playing Affinity.
You can play that in Pauper?
Yes.
Wow, seems pretty powerful. How about you? What are you playing?
I'm playing Tron.
What? That's also in Pauper?
Yes.
All right, move over Modern. We've got our decks right here. Hey, just checking. No reason. What's your life total? Is it 3 by any chance? I found Randy Gallegos, an artist here at the GP. How do you like coming to GPs, Randy?
I like it quite a lot. I'm doing like 10 this year, so you have to like it a certain amount to do that many.
What's your favorite part about being a Magic artist?
Especially with the GPs, actually talking to people and hearing their experiences with the cards. There's a lot of folks who started out playing the game and just loved the game, and then the art really captivated them. And to hear people, especially young people sometimes, having really insightful things to say about the art is really gratifying.
What's your favorite piece of Magic art that you've ever done?
That's a good question. One of my favorites definitely would be Soul Warden, in that it was done early, but I still like it. That's unusual. It's been reprinted a ton of times, and it's still played very commonly. So, yeah.
You've got a lot of beautiful tokens over here for people to use in their decks. I'm going to give you a pretty strange request, and that's find the token that looks most like me, because I'd really like a signed copy from you.
Okay. Well,
We're going to take a walk down Artist Row here at the Grand Prix. Here's Mark Poole, known for some super iconic cards over the history of the game. I found Jason from Weird Cards. Tell me, what the heck is Weird Cards?
Weird Cards is a 501c nonprofit based out of Rochester, Minnesota. We travel around to Magic Fest and other big events to go to where Magic players are to raise money for a local cause. This month it's the Children's Hospital.
So if I've got a lot of bulk extra cards, you'll take them?
Yes, so that's a great point. We have a Magic Kids program. So we take unwanted cards from Magic players and we put them to work in schools. We don't just dump bulk at the doorstep. We actually have a curriculum called Sort, Build, Play. And so we put that into the hands of kids, but also teach them how to play with good sportsmanship and poise and be good winners and good losers.
Wow, that is awesome. High five. High five. Weird Cards, MTG. Judge! Oh wait, I found two of them. Okay, so what's the best part about being a judge at a Magic Fest?
Oh, the best part about being a judge at a Magic Fest? I have friends that live thousands of miles away from me that I see every single weekend at Magic Fests. I see Alderfer here more than I see my mom.
The clock is at 50 minutes over here on the main event stage. That means we're about to start round 6 of 15, but we're not there yet. Lots of players milling about, waiting for round 6 to start. Hey, look, it's Ben S. High five. How you doing? How you doing?
I'm doing all right. I mean, not well magic-wise, but good life-wise. I went 2-5 yesterday in the Pro Tour, and then I lost round 1 of the GP, so
Well, sometimes you got bad beats, but the MPL's pretty exciting for you, huh?
Yeah, the MPL's super exciting. It's pretty amazing just knowing that we have a good job with Magic now and that our income is not dependent on performing well in tournaments. We still want to, of course, but the fact that I ran pretty bad this weekend, I had bad draws in the Pro Tour and I have a pretty bad sealed here in the Grand Prix, I'll go home and get back to making content and streaming and kind of building the Magic community, and my livelihood is not at stake this weekend.
So if you're battling like they are next door at a Magic Fest, you could end up here one day, the feature match area of a Mythic Championship.